Most organizations will soon give their agent a face and a voice. It feels natural, it signals confidence. It also hides what the system actually is, a distributed, probabilistic decision engine wired to your most sensitive tools. This is not a tutorial on building agents, it's an autopsy of why they fail quietly. I'm not anti-voice. I'm anti-unverifiable execution and false trust signaling. We're going to map claim to failure pattern to architectural cause to consequence to mitigation. The lens is simple: control plane versus experience plane, audit versus provenance versus a policy gate. The difference is survival. What Microsoft gets right and why it's still insufficient. Let's start with the strongest counter-argument you'll hear. We already have governance. And to be fair, Microsoft has moved real pieces into place. Purview captures Copilot conversation transcripts, Copilot studio logs activities. You can see who asked, what was said, which sources were touched, and under which identity. That matters. It gives you forensics. It gives you timelines. It turns vague suspicion into a record you can query. Entra goes further. The agent ID model acknowledges the obvious. Agents are non-human identities. Conditional access can evaluate signals and decide whether that identity should get a token right now under this risk posture from this device and location. The model treats agents as first-class citizens in a zero-trust world. Continuous evaluation, short-lived credentials, signals-driven gates. That is the right direction. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Those capabilities are necessary and they remain insufficient for the class of failures agents create. Why? Because they are pointed at two different times in the lifecycle. Conditional access is a token time decision. Purview is a post-incident narrative. Most harm happens at authorization time during tool execution when a specific action is about to occur with real blast radius. The transcript explains the damage, it does not prevent it. The token issuance constrained who could act. It did not constrain what the agent actually did with that token. Walk the timeline as it exists today. An agent authenticates. Conditional access evaluates device, risk, and context. Green light. A transcript records the prompt and the response. Citations record which knowledge sources the agent retrieved. So far so good. Now the agent chooses a tool. Does a deterministic policy gate evaluate that tool call against intent, scope, data class, and venue? Usually not. The action executes. Purview logs the result. The story you will tell later is complete. The policy you needed earlier never fired. Every control fired, just at the wrong time. Microsoft's own framing makes this gap visible if you read it architecturally. Activities are the surface. Turn context is the envelope. They are not state. Event-driven systems deliver out-of-order, duplicated, delayed, retried messages. That's reality, not negligence. The SDK abstracts the pathway. It does not convert a probabilistic orchestration into a deterministic security model. If you don't add idempotency keys, an authoritative state store, and a deterministic workflow around tool calls, you inherit conditional chaos by design. Now apply that to identity. Entra's agent ID blocks egregious tenant-wide scopes and high-privilege roles. Good. But the dominant failure is not a missing global admin role. It's an overbroad, convenience-driven set of delegated permissions on a single agent that can write fast in the wrong place. Least privilege is not a slogan. It's math. Write scopes plus ambiguous prompts plus machine speed execution equals large blast radius. Conditional access cannot shrink that radius once the token exists. Only per tool call policy evaluation can. What about grounding and connectors? Microsoft will say we reduce hallucinations, and they do. Groundedness helps with answers. It does not govern actions. The risky part is not the wrong sentence. It's the wrong delete, the wrong post, the wrong share, executed with valid credentials. Retrieval grounded on entitlements and still speaking in the wrong context is a policy failure, not a search failure. Speech made it socially acceptable. Logs made it legible, neither made it safe. Cost and operations reinforce the same asymmetry. Azure speech pricing for avatars and voices is transparent. Regions are documented, you can opt out, but the architecture still encourages spend in the experience plane. Millions of streaming seconds per month to animate certainty the system didn't earn. That spend adds zero deterministic control. At the same time, the control plane, where policy must live, remains underfunded. If you want to prove seriousness, redirect budget from rendering to gating. So give Microsoft credit for what they got right. Better forensics, stronger identity models, real surfaces for events, and a maturing view of non-human identities. But be precise about the boundary. Audit is not provenance. Provenance is not a policy gate. You need all three in order at the right time. Token issuance controls who can show up. Retrieval and transcript capture what was discussed. A policy gate per tool call decides whether the next action should be allowed given intent, scope, data class, and venue. Without that gate, your best case outcome is a beautiful post-incident report. Your worst case is an eloquent outage. Case study 1, misscoped tool call deletes the wrong side. Here's the failure that never looks dramatic in real time because every control appears green. An enterprise rolls out a productivity agent with SharePoint and Microsoft Graph write scopes. The brief is banal. Help clean up obsolete project folders. The agent is grounded on SharePoint sites and project metadata, and it runs under a dedicated agent ID. Conditional access evaluates device posture and risk, issues a token, and the transcript begins capturing the dialogue. So far, everything aligns with policy. A user asks, "Can you remove old project spaces from last year?" The active list is in the project's archive tracker. The agent retrieves documents, parses titles, matches string patterns and dates, then prepares a list of candidates. The logic is probabilistic and context sensitive. A naming convention here, a last modified date there, some weak signals from an Outlook thread. It decides one site qualifies it. It calls the Graph API to delete it. What actually happened? The site wasn't obsolete. It had been renamed during a live handover, its metadata was a week behind, and a human had copied an old acronym into the tracker. The agent's retrieval stack produced a plausible shortlist. The tool call workflow translated that plausibility into a destructive, authenticated action. No malicious actor, no broken credential, no prompt injection, a perfectly normal week. Now look at the logs. Purview will show an authenticated agent identity initiating a site delete. The transcript will show the user's request and the agent's intent to clean up obsolete project folders. You'll see which knowledge sources were retrieved. You'll see the time and the IP and the user mapping. You will not see the missing pieces that matter operationally. Why that site? Which specific retrieved chunks influenced the scoring? Which candidate sites were considered and rejected? Was any policy ever evaluated that asked, is this site eligible to be deleted under today's constraints? In other words, was there a gate between the agent proposes and the platform disposes? In most real deployments, the answer is no. The action pathway is event-driven. An activity arrives, turn context wraps it, tools are invoked, retries may occur, and idempotency is an afterthought. If messages arrive out of order, if the duper fails, if a delete is retried on a transient error, the side effects are permanent because the workflow treats events as reliable state transitions. The envelope is standardized, the semantics are not. Architecturally, this is where entropy enters. A probabilistic selection created a candidate set. A convenience-driven permission model made delete available in the same identity that fetches metadata. A missing policy gate let a destructive call execute because all earlier controls had already fired. Conditional access had reduced who could hold the token. It never adjudicated whether this specific delete should proceed given the site's venue, data class, or intent. The post-incident review writes itself. The agent misinterpreted the user's request. We'll improve the prompt. We'll add a second confirmation step. These are experience plane patches. They do not change the control plane. The agent still holds write scopes. The tool still accepts imperative calls. The workflow still treats a request as a command, not a proposal. There's a deterministic alternative. First, idempotency. Every destructive request carries a unique operation ID persisted in an authoritative state store. If the same event replays, the system rejects it with no side effect. Second, an allow list. The eligible deletion set is computed by policy, not inference. Only sites tagged retired, true and dormant 90 days, and owner approved true in the authoritative catalog may be deleted. Third, a policy engine. Before any tool executes, a decision is evaluated against intent, scope, data class, and venue, and the outcome is persisted with the action. If the policy denies, the tool never sees the request. Add one more boundary, segmented identities. Read-only discovery runs under a read principle. Recommendations are written into a queue. Deletion runs under a separate high-friction write principle with a tightly scoped app permission. A failure in one domain cannot instruct the other to act. The agent proposes. The control plane disposes. Rerun the incident with those guardrails. The agent compiles candidates. The policy engine evaluates each against the authoritative catalog. The renamed active site fails the eligibility rule. The delete request never reaches the Graph API. The transcript still tells a story. The logs still show work. The outage never happens. That's the distinction that matters. Audit explains harm. A gate prevents it. Case study 2, correct credentials policy violation. Now the failure that makes governance uncomfortable because everything looks compliant on paper. An HR-grounded agent sits in a Teams meeting. It's been instructed on policy documents, HR FAQs, and a curated set of compensation guides. It runs under an agent ID with delegated read access to the HR knowledge space and to the SharePoint library where the compensation team publishes quarterly bands. Conditional access evaluates signals and issues a token. Purview is set to capture conversation transcripts and citations. The setup is familiar and on audit checklists, green. A director asks, what are the employee trends this quarter? It sounds harmless. The agent retrieves semi-sensitive compensation materials, nothing classified as secret, but not meant for broad broadcast, and a couple of anonymized dashboards. Grounding works. The agent cites the right documents, passes the right tables, and composes a verbal response. Then it answers out loud to the entire meeting. Compensation for level 6 in region A grew 7.4%. Internal mobility for level 5 to level 6 was 3.1%. The gender delta in level 4 engineering is 5.8%. The numbers are illustrative. The problem is not factual error. It's venue and aggregation risk. The agent just verbalized a sensitive slice of compensation analytics to an audience that includes vendors and a partner organization. No row-level breach, no PII, no exfiltration. A policy violation anyway. Walk the telemetry. Purview will show an authenticated agent identity, a transcript of the question and answer, citations to the HR library, and a correct user-to-resource mapping. Entra will show token issuance under acceptable risk conditions. From a compliance perspective, allowed data accessed by an entitled identity and disclosed in a meeting. From a governance perspective, unacceptable aggregation surfaced in an inappropriate venue. What's missing is not logging. What's missing is intent evaluation and venue sensitivity at the moment of action. Nothing in the current path asked, is it permissible to verbalize this aggregation in this context to this audience? Grounding reduced hallucination. It did not constrain speech. The system was compliant and still violated policy. This is where audit provenance policygate gets real. Audit gave you a story, who, what, when, from where. Provenance, if you had it, would add the decision chain, which chunks were retrieved, which alternatives were considered, which reasoning tokens weighed venue. The policygate would have made the decision, deny disclosure at this granularity in a mixed audience meeting, or force a safe summary. Architecturally, the fix is not to hide more data or to ban voice. It's to move the decision to the right time and the right plane. Before the agent speaks, treat the utterance as a tool call with attributes. Data class equals compensation, aggregation equals cohort, audience equals mixed, venue equals external participants present. A policy engine evaluates those attributes against rules. Compensation cohorts may not be disclosed verbally in sessions with non-employees, convert to high-level deltas with no subgroup references. If the rule fires deny, the speech tool never receives the payload. If the rule fires transform, the agent speaks a sanitized summary. High-level compensation remained within target ranges. Detailed breakdown is available to HR-only audiences. Two more boundaries make this stable. First, classify outputs, not just inputs. Tag the generated content with a sensitivity derived from the sources and the aggregation. That label flows into the speech path and UI surfaces. Second, segment identities by venue. Meeting Assistant runs under a read-only speak-restricted principle. Deep Dive HR Analysis runs under a separate identity, gated to HR-only channels. A request in the wrong venue cannot silently escalate across identities. Replay the incident with those controls. The agent composes a detailed response. The policy engine evaluates venue and aggregation. The deny rule blocks verbalization and prompts. I can share a high-level summary now. Detailed compensation trends are available in the HR channel. The transcript still exists, the citations are still recorded, the policy outcome is persisted alongside the action. Your post-incident review shows prevention, not explanation. Compliance systems fail in the gap between entitlement and intent. Deterministic gates close that gap. Case study 3, external shadow agent, internal blast radius. Now the failure you won't see on any official dashboard until the damage is baked in. A developer working against a deadline publishes an internet-facing agent to deflect customer tickets. It's a quick path, a public web front end, a Copilot-style agent behind it, and an Entra app registration with generous permissions because the backend knowledge lives inside the tenant. The agent needs to answer questions, so it's given read scopes across several internal systems, SharePoint sites, a product wiki, a lightly governed knowledge base, and a support analytics store. It also receives a couple of write scopes for future features. No change board, no security review, it works in staging, it's pushed live. A customer asks a seemingly harmless question. What's the workaround for the outage on the Exxon 20 firmware? The agent retrieves internal runbooks, post-mortem fragments, and draft remediation notes that were never meant to leave the company. It composes a clean, confident answer and publishes it to the public chat. There is no malicious actor in this story, only a public agent with broad scopes and a good retrieval stack. The logs look clean. Entra shows valid token issuance under a client credentials flow. Conditional access, if configured, evaluates the workload identity and grants access based on expected signals. Purview records internal document reads by the agent identity. From a compliance lens, it's all legitimate. A registered app, an allowed scope, a permitted retrieval. What's missing is the part you needed most. There is no record of why this tool was selected over a public knowledge source. There is no captured decision chain tying the external query to the specific internal chunks. There is no policy evaluation artifact that says the external agent request venue equals internet, data class equals internal only, deny disclosure. There is no approval trail that this agent should have been exposed publicly at all. The transcripts, if they exist, tell you what was said. They do not tell you what the control plane failed to prevent. Blast radius is not only about delete operations, it's about speed, reach, and replication. A public agent with internal read scopes creates machine speed egress. One question becomes 10. Screenshots proliferate, aggregators scrape, the operational week is over before anyone sees the pattern. Security teams pivot to forensics, the transcripts confirm the obvious. The architecture, not the user, did this. This is where non-human identity meets failure domains. A single over-permissioned NHI served two incompatible roles, public responder and internal reader. A bug in governance, not code. Least privilege was treated as an aspiration, not a boundary. The identity had no egress-aware policy gate. The retrieval path had no venue filter. The speech path, or in this case, the public response path, had no classification guard. Everything that followed was deterministic propagation of an earlier omission. There is a deterministic alternative that closes the hole without killing the use case. Start by splitting the agent into domains. The public-facing responder runs under an external identity with zero access to internal corp data planes. Its only backend is a curated, publish-approved public knowledge base. Internal retrieval runs under a separate internal-only identity gated by network and policy. The two do not share tokens, keys, or scopes. The external identity can ask the internal one to propose an answer only through a policy-controlled broker that evaluates venue and data class. Most requests never cross the boundary. Next, put a gate in the path where it matters. Treat every candidate response as a content item with attributes. Source, classifications, aggregation level, audience, venue. A policy engine evaluates those attributes against egress rules. Internal-only content may not be disclosed to unauthenticated users. Drafts and postmortems are never eligible for external responses. Aggregations derived from internal sources must map to a pre-approved external template or be denied. If the rule denies, the broker returns no eligible content found, and the public agent politely defers to support escalation. If the rule transforms, the broker returns a sanitized, externally approved snippet with citations to public docs. Add one more guard that makes incident response boring. Persist policy outcomes with the action. When a response goes out, you retain not only the transcript and retrieval citations, but the policy decision that allowed it. Allowed. Rule X201, source set, PUB docs 2024 Q2. Now your audit becomes proof, not prose, and your prevention becomes visible, not assumed. Replay the incident. The customer asks about firmware. The public agent searches the approved external corpus. It finds nothing precise. It asks the broker. The broker evaluates the internal candidate against egress rules. Deny. The public agent replies, I can't share internal remediation notes here, but I can connect you with support. The screenshot that circulates is a refusal, not a leak. That is what it looks like when the control plane, not the interface, decides the blast radius. Event-driven entropy. Activities aren't state. Microsoft is right about one thing that most teams misread. Activities and turn context are the intended surface. They're not hacks, they're envelopes. The mistake isn't using events, it's pretending events are reliable state transitions. Architecturally, it is something else. An event is a proposal. State is authority. In an event-driven system, 4 realities stack whether you acknowledge them or not: duplication, delay, reordering, and loss. They are not edge cases. They are the environment. A retry duplicates an activity. A congested link delays it. 2 workers pull from the same queue and reorder it. A transient broker fault drops it. Your code can be perfect and still experience conditional chaos because the system did what distributed systems do. That distinction matters. If a delete request is retried after a transient 502 and you don't carry an idempotency key to an authoritative state store, you haven't retried a conversation. You've scheduled another deletion. If a mark complete activity arrives before the create task activity due to reordering and you treat activities as truth, you've encoded a time machine. And if you dedupe by best effort without a persisted operation ID, your diagnostics will swear nothing happened while your data plane shows damage. Turn context is an envelope, not a ledger. You can read claims, channel data, and prior turn state. But none of that is authoritative outside the process boundary unless you anchor it. Activities carry evidence of intent. They do not carry permission. The control plane must reconcile intent with authority every single time. Once you accept that, mitigation stops being optional ceremony and becomes system law. First, idempotency keys. Every tool-reaching request carries a unique collision-resistant operation ID. You persist it in a store that outlives the process, queryable in O1. If you see the same ID, you return the prior decision and effect. No side effects repeat. No at least once surprise becomes twice. Second, an authoritative state store. Not the transient in-memory turn state. Not a cache with weak guarantees. A durable store that defines the source of truth for workflow position and resource eligibility. Task 8473 exists. Site X is eligible, false. Operation Y is decided, deny. The event stream can be noisy. The state store is not. Third, deterministic workflows for tool calls. The agent never issues an imperative. It submits a request structure: actor, intent, scope, data class, venue, operation ID. A policy engine evaluates that structure against rules and authoritative state and returns an allow, deny, transform outcome. Tools only accept decisions from the policy engine, scope to the operation ID. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes. Now layer in the realities you can't prevent. Reordering. The policy engine evaluates against current authoritative state each time. If the complete arrives before create, the request fails deterministically as invalid because the state says the resource doesn't exist. Duplication. The operation ID short circuits repeats. Delay. Decisions cache by operation ID for bounded time with explicit expiry. Late arrivals get the same outcome, not a fresh guess. Loss. You design workflows to be resilient to missing intermediate activities. The state store, not the event stream, drives reconciliation. This is why direct line and channel events feel brittle when teams wire them as state machines. You build a control plane out of envelopes. It will flex like paper. The fix is not to abandon events. It's to demote them to what they are: proposals and telemetry. Authority lives elsewhere. Webhooks and streaming don't change this. A streaming partial response is still an event. A webhook from SharePoint is still an event. Both can be duplicated, delayed, or dropped. Your safety depends on the same spine: idempotency keys, an authoritative state store, and a deterministic policy decision before side effects. Here's the operating rule you enforce everywhere: if an event can't be safely replayed, it shouldn't control state. That applies to deletes, emails, shares, payments, and anything with a blast radius. Safe replay means the same operation ID yields the same decision and the same effect, regardless of arrival, count, or order. If you can't guarantee that, you haven't built a reliable system. You've built a roulette table with nice transcripts. When you adopt this model, your incident reviews change tone. You stop explaining how a rare timing glitch produced a bad outcome and start showing a denied decision artifact attached to a prevented action. The experience plane still narrates. The control plane finally governs. The experience plane tags, WebRTC, speech regions, cost. Now the part nobody budgets for until it's embedded in the demo. The experience plane tags. When you add a face and a voice, you don't just add delight. You add networks, regions, and metered seconds. Each one is a new failure domain with no control value. Start with WebRTC. In a lab, it looks perfect. Peer-to-peer, low latency, bidirectional media. In an enterprise, it runs headlong into reality. NAT traversal, VPN hairpins, deep packet inspection, split tunnel policies, and compliance proxies. Turn relays become mandatory because most corporate firewalls won't allow UDP to the wild. That adds hops and jitter. Your real-time avatar now rides a path with unpredictable queuing delay. Sub 150 milliseconds is ideal. 150 to 300 is barely tolerable. Beyond 300, users experience talk over and clipped phrases. This isn't negligence, it's the physics of a network you don't control. And those relays aren't free. Turn bandwidth costs money. CPU on media servers costs money. Diagnostics to explain why a subset of users in one region have 400 millisecond round trip when everyone else has 120 costs money. Each mitigation you bolt on, adaptive bitrate, FEC, jitter buffers, rescues the illusion while increasing operational entropy. None of it makes your tool code safer. All of it must be run, monitored, and paid for. Now look at speech. Azure ties speech resources to regions by design. That's a compliance virtue and an architectural cost. A resource in West Europe can't authenticate with a key from East US. If you serve multiple geographies, you're running multiple speech resources with separate keys, quotas, failover plans, and incident playbooks. China is segregated again with China East 2 or China North 2 endpoints. The illusion of one global persona is propped up by a farm of regional services and routing logic you maintain. When a region blips, your avatar loses its voice, not because your agent is down, but because one of the many required regions is rate limiting or having an incident. Again, higher blast radius, no increase in determinism. Billing is honest and relentless. Text-to-speech and avatars are billed per second. If you need a number that lands in executive ears, keep it simple. 50 concurrent sessions, 6 peak hours per day, 22 workdays per month. That's 50, 6 at 3T, 600 at 22, about 23.7 million streaming seconds. You can do your local rate card math later. The point is the unit, seconds. You are now financing human certainty at video game economics, metered to the second, across relays and regions you must keep upright. Add the rest of the stack. Speech to text on the inbound path with accents, crosstalk, and meeting noise. Egress from your media relays. Storage for transcripts and audio snippets if your compliance team requires retention. Monitoring that can attribute failures to the right layer: network, relay, browser, speech region, avatar, synth. Support tickets from one business unit that can't get under 250 milliseconds on their MPLS to cloud route. Every piece is necessary for the illusion. None of it is a policy gate. And this is where the experience plain text becomes a strategy problem. It diverts budget and engineering energy toward rendering trust rather than enforcing it. The avatar doesn't enforce least privilege. The voice doesn't evaluate intent. The WebRTC pipeline doesn't classify outputs. You are scaling the surface that convinces humans they can rely on the system while leaving the plane that actually prevents harm underfunded. There's a clean trade available if you care about outcomes. Keep UI and voice strictly optional. Treat them as adapters on the edge, not dependencies in the core. Route the same dollars you would spend on avatars, turn, and regional speech sprawl into the control plane, per tool call policy engines, idempotency guarantees, authoritative state stores, and segmented agent identities. Fund negative space in retrieval, so silence is the default when evidence is missing. Instrument policy outcomes, so every action carries a proof, not a story. Because here's the blunt operational truth. If the avatar drops for 30 minutes, you have an irritated business unit. If a destructive tool call executes without a gate for 30 milliseconds, you have an outage and a board packet. The experience plane tax buys applause. The control plane spend buys survivability. One makes the demo smooth, the other makes the incident brief. Redirect budget from rendering to gating, and you'll feel it the first time a denied decision replaces a post-mortem. NHIs as super users, where real risk lives. Treat the agent as what it is, a non-human identity with machine speed privileges. It doesn't get bored, it doesn't hesitate, and it never fat fingers. When you wire tools to it, you've built a super user that acts faster than any human admin ever could. That is the center of gravity, not hallucinations, not avatars. Identity and authorization define the blast radius. Microsoft's Entra agent ID is progress because it acknowledges this explicitly. Agents are first-class identities, but acknowledging the category doesn't neutralize the risk pattern that dominates real incidents. The pattern is simple. An NHI is granted standing scopes to keep development smooth. It accumulates permissions as features accrete. Then, an ambiguous prompt, a brittle retrieval, or a subtle orchestration bug routes that power into the wrong place. Nothing exotic. No escalation chain, just valid credentials used at the speed of regret. There are 3 sins you see on repeat. First, broad data plane scopes like files, read-write on all, sites, full control, all, or tenant-level application permissions that never expire. They exist because developers optimize for works in staging. Second, single identity design. One agent, one principal, one token that does everything. Read, write, external calls across domains. That merges failure modes. Third, no time-boundedness, persistent secrets and long-lived app permissions that keep working after the feature they justified is sunset. Now layer machine speed on those sins. A human with too much access can delete a site in 30 seconds. An NHI can delete 100 in the time it takes a monitor to ship its first alert. A human can paste one report to the wrong channel. An NHI can mirror a library to an external venue before anyone notices. Speed isn't just a multiplier, it changes the shape of the incident. You don't get the warning shots you're used to. You get completion. Conditional access trims who gets a token. It does not by itself constrain what the token can do once granted. That's why you segregate privilege by capability and venue, and you do it at the identity boundary, not as a polite intention inside an orchestrator. Read-only discovery runs under a read principle that cannot write. Write actions run under a separate principle with minimal resource-scoped app permissions. Key vaulted, short-lived, and minted just in time. External interactions run under an egress-aware principle that cannot see internal corp data planes. One agent can own 3 identities. That's not overhead, that's a break. This is where per-tool call policy gates earn their keep. You don't depend on the agent knows not to do this. You make it structurally impossible without an allow decision. The agent constructs a request. Actor is write principal, intent equals delete, scope equals resource X, data class equals internal, venue is tenant. The policy engine evaluates that tuple against rules and authoritative state. Allow with constraints, transform to a safe queue, or deny. Tools accept decisions, not free-form imperatives. Your logs now contain policy outcomes next to actions. Your incident reviews shift from why did it do that to who changed the rule that allows this. Least privilege is not only about breadth, it's also about time. The right to act should be the exception, not the baseline. Time-bounded tokens, short-lived app-only permissions, and on-behalf of flows that inherit the caller's maximum reduce the window of loss. A right identity that goes idle should lose its teeth. A secret that never rotates is a future outage with a clock. You also need negative space around retrieval and speech. A read principle should fail closed when evidence is thin. No eligible content is a safety feature, not a UX bug. It's how you prevent a read identity from turning into a super spreader by proxy, retrieving broadly, synthesizing confidently, and publishing to the wrong venue because nothing said it couldn't. Finally, design failure domains as if compromise is inevitable. Assume the external-facing identity will be phished. Assume a developer will publish a sample with a lingering scope. Assume an orchestrator will misroute an intent. When, not if. That's why you keep read, write, and egress in independent compartments. Why you gate tool calls with a deterministic engine. Why you store authoritative state outside the event stream. And why you persist policy outcomes with actions. Compromise then looks like a denied decision and a constrained blast radius, not a week-long archaeology project. The avatar won't save you here. The transcript won't save you here. Only boundaries do. Treat NHIs like super users in waiting and build the brakes into the plane that actually moves. Audit provenance policy gate. Here's the line that separates reassurance from control. Audit tells you what happened. Provenance tells you why you think it happened. A policy gate decides whether it's allowed to happen at all. You need all three in that order at the right time. Most enterprises have only the first, a partial version of the second, and almost none of the third. Start with audit. Microsoft has improved this meaningfully. Copilot conversation transcripts can land in Purview. Copilot Studio logs activities. You can correlate who asked, what was said, which knowledge sources were touched, and under which identity. That matters after an incident. It gives you a spine for forensics, a timeline for counsel, and a way to separate rumor from record. But audit is always retrospective. It is the story the system can tell about itself after the fact. Provenance goes a level deeper. It's not just what and when, it's the decision chain. Which chunks were retrieved, which candidates were considered and rejected, which tool options the orchestrator surfaced, which constraints the agent claimed to respect, and which signals tipped the final selection. Provenance is an explanation graph, not a log line. Without it, analysts infer causality from flat events and transcripts, which is how postmortems turn into fan fiction. Now the part that actually changes outcomes, a policy gate. A gate is not a guideline in a prompt. It is a deterministic decision point that evaluates a structured request, actor, intent, scope, data class, venue, against rules and authoritative state, and returns allow, deny, or transform before any tool executes. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes, the decision outcome is persisted with the action. That's the difference between we saw a delete and we can prove why this delete was permitted under Rule D104. Watch how the three diverge on the same timeline. An agent authenticates. Conditional access evaluates token time signals and issues a token. Good control, wrong time for authorization. The user asks a question. Audit starts capturing. The agent retrieves documents and candidate resources. Provenance should record retrieval IDs, ranking, and alternative paths. The agent prepares to call a tool. A policy gate must evaluate that proposed action. If it allows, the tool executes and the policy outcome is attached. If it denies, the tool never sees the request and the denial is attached instead. Afterward, audit captures the effect and provenance links decision to consequence. In most enterprises today, two things are missing at this moment. First, the gate itself. Tool calls are executed imperatively, not adjudicated. Second, the policy evaluation artifacts. No persisted proof that this was reviewed by a machine policy and approved under constraint X. That's why transcripts feel like progress and still fail you. They narrate the accident. They don't show you the red light that should have been there. There's a second gap that matters, negative space. Provenance must include what did not happen, which sites were considered and rejected, which internal chunks were excluded by egress rules, which tool options were presented and disallowed by policy. Without that shadow, you can't distinguish the agent found only one path from the agent took the only unconstrained path. Now tie this back to retrieval. Grounding reduces hallucination, but only a gate can enforce sight or silent behavior. Pre-retrieval filters bound the candidate set. Post-retrieval policy evaluates whether this audience and venue permit verbalization at the requested granularity. If the rule denies, the agent says less. Audit will show a polite refusal. Provenance will show denial under Rule V302. The policy gate will stand in front of the speech tool and take the heat. You can implement this without boiling the ocean. Start with your highest blast radius tools. Delete, share, post, email, payment. Wrap them with a decision service that accepts structured requests, checks idempotency, queries authoritative state, evaluates rules and returns outcomes. Persist those outcomes alongside actions. Instrument retrieval to log chunk IDs and reasons for exclusion. Then turn your audit from a diary into evidence. Action, source, decision, rule, constraint. Audit explains, provenance convinces, the gate prevents. Without that ordering, your best capability remains writing eloquent post-incident reports about failures you could have denied in 30 milliseconds. Anthropomorphic trust bias and governance optics give the agent a face and a voice, and you get an automatic upgrade in credibility. That's human interface trust bias doing what it always does. A steady tone, eye contact, and low response latency signal competence, our brain's mistake for reliability. Architecturally, it is something else. A probabilistic decision engine performing inside an event-driven envelope now wearing a suit. This is the uncomfortable truth. Embodiment shifts scrutiny from the system to the performance. Users stop asking what policy approved this action, and start saying like it sounded certain. That the persona becomes a confidence amplifier, and confidence is not control. Watch how that bias infects governance. A transcript makes the interaction legible. Leaders read it and feel informed. A video snippet of the avatar handling a tricky exchange looks like operational maturity. The optics improve, the control plane did not. Without a gate, the same agent can perform a polished refusal in one case and a polished violation in the next. The difference is not style. It's whether a deterministic decision occurred before the tool executed. Embodiment also muddies responsibility. When the agent speaks in the first person, teams unconsciously relocate agency into the interface. It misunderstood. It made a choice. No, your orchestration made a choice, based on retrieval and prompts, with credentials you issued. The more human the agent seems, the easier it is to abdicate architectural responsibility and reach for training tweaks instead of enforcement. Now look at meeting culture. Put a speaking agent into a live session and you widen the bias. Real-time answers carry social momentum. Participants accept the output to keep the conversation moving. Few will pause a call to ask, was that aggregation allowed in this venue? The voice pushed them past the question. Afterward, governance reviews a clean transcript and a tidy set of citations. They see diligence. What they don't see is the missing policy outcome that should have constrained speech. This is how you end up with governance theater. Dashboards filled with transcripts, activity logs, and grounding indicators. You can search, correlate, and export. Impressive. But none of those artifacts by themselves prove that a policy engine adjudicated intent, scope, data class, and venue before each action. The optics of oversight rise while the entropy in the authorization path remains. The fix is not to strip the face or mute the voice, it's to make the interface optional and the control plane decisive. Replace trust by persona with trust by proof. The proof is a policy decision persisted next to every action. Allow, deny, transform, under rule R217 with the source set S841 at time t. That artifact defeats bias because it's legible without performance. It also survives the meeting. When someone asks, why did it say that? You don't replay the avatar, you show the gate. 2 operational habits counter the optics trap. First, invert demos. Lead with the gate, not the avatar. Here's the deny firing under venue policy. Here's the transform outcome. Here's the idempotent replay returning the same decision. Then, if you must, show the face. Second, instrument negative space. Capture what the system refused to do and why. Excluded chunks, disallowed tools, suppressed utterances. Without negative space, governance optics read like a highlight reel. With it, they read like evidence of restraint. This is also where budget choices expose priorities. If your spend concentrates on turn, speech regions, and avatar seconds, you're investing in persuasion. If your spend concentrates on per tool call policy, authoritative state, and segmented identities, you're investing in control. One buys applause in a demo, the other buys safety at 0213 on a Wednesday. Finally, set the rule in language everyone can repeat. Personification is optional, determinism at the control plane is not. Bias thrives where proof is absent. Kill the bias with proof. Logs tell stories. Provenance shows reasoning. Gates prevent incidents. Put the gate before the story, and the optics will finally match reality. Deterministic patterns that actually work. If you want agents that don't quietly widen your blast radius, stop tuning prompts and start replacing chance with proof. There are 5 patterns that hold under stress and make incidents boring. Pattern 1. Idempotency with an authoritative state spine. Every tool-reaching action carries a unique operation ID, generated once, collision-resistant, and persisted before any side effect. The policy engine and the tool both read and write against that spine. Replays return the original decision in effect. Duplicates die without impact. Reordering becomes harmless because state not arrival order determines eligibility. If create hasn't materialized in the state store, complete fails deterministically. If delete already succeeded for op133, a retry returns the same outcome and no second deletion occurs. The rule that matters is this. If an event can't be safely replayed, it shouldn't control state. Pattern 2. Per tool call policy evaluation. Treat every call as a structured request, never an imperative. The agent proposes a tuple, actor, intent, scope, data class, venue, operation ID. A policy engine evaluates that tuple against rules and authoritative state, then returns allow, deny, or transform, plus constraints and a decision ID. Tools accept only decisions, not free-form commands, and only for the matching operation ID. You persist the outcome next to the action. This is the difference between we saw an action and we can prove why this action was allowed under Rule D104 with constraints C17. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes. Pattern 3. Segmented agent identities. Read, write, and egress, each in its own failure domain. Read-only discovery runs under a principle that cannot write. Write operations execute under a separate principle with minimal resource-bounded app permissions, minted just in time and short-lived. External communication runs under an egress-aware principle with zero access to internal corp data planes. The same agent can coordinate 3 identities. That's not theoretical purity, it's blast radius math. A failure in one domain doesn't cascade across the others because tokens, scopes, and network paths do not overlap. Pattern 4. Retrieval constraint generation with negative space. Prefilter retrieval by user and agent entitlements, data class, and venue before the model ever sees it. Then, force, cite, or silent behavior. If eligible evidence is absent, the agent must say less. For outputs, attach derived sensitivity based on sources and aggregation, and route speech or publishing through the same policy engine that gates tools. Audience mixed, data class, compensation cohort should yield a deny or transform before anything is verbalized. Grounding reduces hallucination. Negative space makes silence the safe default when proof is thin. Pattern 5. Policy as code outcomes persisted with action. It's not enough to evaluate a rule. You must persist the decision artifact, including the rule ID, constraints, input attributes, and the link to authoritative state. That record travels with the action into your logs. In post-incident review, you don't infer intent from transcripts. You show the policy that allowed or denied. Over time, you get denial analytics, transform rates, and hotspots by venue or tool. Governance stops being theater and starts being telemetry. These patterns interlock. Idempotency and authoritative state prevent the event stream from becoming your source of truth. Per tool call gates, move authorization to the only moment that matters. Segmented identities constrain what a compromised token can reach. Retrieval constraints and negative space prevent speech from becoming an unmanaged egress path. Persisted policy outcomes turn audit into evidence and provenance into proof. None of this requires exotic infrastructure. You can start at the line where harm originates, the tools. Wrap your highest risk tools, delete, share, post, email, payment, with a thin decision service. Require operation IDs, check for duplicates, look up authoritative state, evaluate codified rules, return outcomes, and persist them. Then ratchet identity, carve read from write and write from egress. Then clamp retrieval, tag sources, enforce eligibility, log denials and exclusions. The avatar will still smile, the transcript will still read well. The difference is that the plane that matters will finally be deterministic. If you remember nothing else, keep this sentence. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes. That's how you turn eloquent outages into quiet non-events. Conditional access, necessary, not sufficient. Conditional access is the strongest front gate you have. It evaluates signals, scores risk, and decides whether an identity, human or non-human, should receive a token under current conditions. Device posture, sign-in risk, location, workload identity context, all in scope. For agents that matters, it shrinks the population that can even attempt to act, treat it as mandatory. But here's the boundary you can't cross with it. Conditional access is a token time control. It answers who can show up now. It does not answer what should this identity be allowed to do next, in this venue, with this data, at this moment. The failures we just walked through live at authorization time, per tool call. That's a different plane. Say it in a sequence you can audit. The agent requests a token. Conditional access evaluates and, if satisfied, issues it. Good. The agent retrieves eligible data under its scopes. Logged. The agent proposes an action. Delete, share, post, email, pay. That proposal must hit a deterministic policy gate that evaluates actor, intent, scope, data class, and venue before any tool executes. If you stop at the first two steps, you have identity hygiene and good forensics. You do not have control. So you design the system as a braid, not a blunt instrument. Pair conditional access with least privilege, trim scopes to the smallest set that lets a capability work, then split those capabilities across segmented identities. Read-only discovery runs under a read principle that can't write. Writes run under a separate principle with minimal resource-scoped app permissions and short-lived credentials minted just in time. External communication runs under an egress-aware principle with no visibility into internal core planes. One agent orchestrates, three identities act, none can impersonate the others. That's how you shrink blast radius after the token exists. Then bolt a gate in front of every high-risk tool, not a prompt guideline, a real gate. The agent never sends a verb, it sends a request. Actor, intent, scope, data class, venue, operation ID. A policy engine evaluates that structure against rules and authoritative state, returns allow, deny, transform, and persists the decision with the action. Tools accept decisions, not free-form imperatives. Now you have proof, not promises. Make monitoring pull its weight without becoming noise. Anomaly detection belongs in two places, the identity plane and the action plane. At identity, watch for unusual token issuance patterns on your agent principles. New locations, odd cadences, bursts outside normal schedules. At action, watch for tool call shapes that don't fit the baseline. Spikes and deletes, sudden egress, novel venues, alerts are routed to policy, not panic. If you see drift, you tighten rules or descope identities. The system behaves deterministically under stress because the control points are explicit. There's a pragmatic design cadence teams can follow. Start by enumerating capabilities, not personas. Discover sites, compile candidates, delete, share, speak. For each capability, define the minimum scopes required, then assign an identity. Apply conditional access to each identity with the strictest feasible policies. Device compliance, sign-in risk, network bounds. Next, codify the rules that govern those capabilities. Eligibility rules live in the state spine. Venue and data class rules live in the gate. Finally, wire tools to accept only decisions with matching operation IDs from the gate. That's the difference between a guardrail you hope the model respects and an enforcement point the model can't bypass. What you get is an end-to-end chain you can read and defend. Token issuance proves who could show up. Retrieval logs prove what was considered. Policy outcomes prove why an action was or wasn't permitted. Tool effects prove what changed. Conditional access made presence conditional. The gate made action conditional. Together they move you from "we authenticated the problem" to "we prevented it." Keep repeating the sentence that keeps teams honest. Conditional access decides who may try. A policy gate decides what may happen. Treat one as necessary, the other as non-negotiable. Without both, you're still writing eloquent reports about incidents you could have denied in 30 milliseconds. RAG as a security boundary, not a knowledge feature. Most teams treat RAG like a search plugin. Toss vectors in a database, fetch the closest chunks, and hope the model grounds its answer. That is a knowledge feature. It reduces hallucination. It does not create a boundary. A boundary is something you can enforce, measure, and prove under stress. Start with the first principle that flips the mental model. Retrieval is an authorization event, not a convenience step. If a chunk is not eligible for this actor, in this venue, at this moment, it does not exist. Eligibility is computed before similarity, not after generation. That's how you stop nearest neighbor from outrunning policy. Make the filters explicit and early. Before any vector search, apply metadata constraints that bind the candidate set to entitlements and context. The minimum set looks like this: user id or agent principal, access scope, the authority that grants visibility, confidentiality, data class, and venue, where the answer will be consumed. Your retrieval query is not "give me the top 5 semantically similar." It is "give me candidates where user ID allowed, access scope allowed, confidentiality allowed for venue, ordered by similarity." If the filter returns nothing, the model must prefer silence over speculation. That silence is a feature. It's the negative space that prevents leaks. Now, constraint generation to evidence. Retrieval constraint generation forces cite or silent behavior. The model can only state what is supported by eligible chunks, and it must attach citations that map to those chunk IDs. If the instruction asks for synthesis beyond the retrieved set, the policy is refuse or degrade with a safe summary template. Your goal is not eloquence. It is verifiability. Provenance sits alongside this path, not behind it. Log the retrieval transaction as a first-class object. Query hash, filter predicates, returned chunk IDs, and reasons for exclusion. Persist the generation decision, which citations were used, which claims were unsupported and dropped, which template was applied, and the derived sensitivity of the output. Provenance is not an afterthought. It is the proof that the boundary held. Treat denial as a positive outcome and record it. When filters exclude a chunk because confidentiality internal and venue external, log excluded C201 reason venue. When no eligible evidence exists, log deny R404 reason empty candidate set. Those denials are what you show a regulator, a security reviewer, or an auditor when they ask why the agent did not answer. Without that negative space, you are back to transcripts and faith. This is also where you separate the data plane from the boundary. A governed data plane gives you lineage, classification, and residency. The boundary enforces those properties at retrieval and speech. You do not trust the model to remember a sensitivity label. You pass sensitivity into the policy engine and make the speech tool require an allow decision. If the output's derived sensitivity exceeds the venue's allowance, the path ends before a mouth opens. Now bring connectors into the picture. Connectors expand sources. They do not expand entitlements. Each connector must surface metadata that the boundary can evaluate. Tenant, container, owner, classification, data region, and any legal holds. If the connector can't produce those fields, it can't participate in RAG for venues that require enforcement. Grounded without governance is just a larger leak domain. There are 2 implementation details that make this practical at scale. First, push eligibility into the index. Store access vars scope, confidentiality, and allowed venues as filterable fields alongside embeddings refreshed from the authoritative catalog. Your retrieval call remains olog and +k, not an after-the-fact join. Second, standardize refusal templates per data class and venue so the agents know is predictable and fast. A refusal that takes 2 seconds and cites the policy is better than a confused digression that burns tokens to say nothing. Edge cases are where boundaries prove themselves. A mixed audience meeting asks for a sensitive cohort trend. Filters return eligible chunks, but policy forbids verbalization. The generation path downgrades to a high-level summary template with no subgroup references. The speech tool receives the transformed output only if the gate allows. Provenance attaches transform v302. A follow-up asks in a private HR channel, same retrieval, different venue. The gate allows the detailed text answer, not speech. The boundary did not change facts. It changed exposure. Finally, measure the boundary as a product of its own. Track denial rates by venue and data class, transform rates by audience, and incidents avoided, policy denies that replaced what would previously have been after-the-fact investigations. Report those numbers. They are your ROI. Then repeat the sentence that keeps teams honest. RAG is not there to make the model smarter. It is there to make the system safer. When retrieval becomes authorization and generation becomes sight or silent, your knowledge feature turns into a security boundary you can prove. The autopsy cadence: claim, failure, cause, consequence, fix. Claim 1. Misscoped delete is not an edge case. It's a deterministic outcome of missing gates. Failure. An agent tasked to clean up obsolete project folders deletes an active site. Cause: event-driven ambiguity plus overbroad scopes. A retry, a duplicate activity, or a stale eligibility check pushes a destructive tool call without an idempotency key or an authoritative state read. Consequence: a business outage with transcripts that explain the narrative, not the permission. Fix: move authority out of envelopes. Every destructive request carries an operation ID, hits a policy engine with actor, intent, scope, data class, and venue, and is adjudicated before the tool executes. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes. Persist the decision with the action so prevention becomes provable. Claim 2. Compliant can still mean violates policy. Failure. An HR-grounded agent verbalizes cohort compensation in a mixed audience meeting. Cause: grounding reduced hallucination but never evaluated venue or aggregation at the moment of speech. Logs are green, entitled identity, eligible documents, correct citations, yet the utterance is unacceptable. Consequence: reputational and regulatory exposure without a classic breach, plus governance theater where transcripts substitute for proof. Fix: treat speech as a tool call. Pass output attributes, source sensitivity, aggregation level, audience, venue, into a policy engine that either denies or transforms before audio synthesis. Classify outputs, not only inputs. Segment identities, so the meeting assistant cannot escalate into the analyst's channel. Claim 3. Shadow agents are a blast radius amplifier. Failure. A public agent with broad internal read scopes answers external questions with internal runbooks. Cause: a single non-human identity served two incompatible roles, external responder and internal reader, without an egress-aware gate. No captured decision chain, no policy artifact, no approval that it should have been internet-facing at all. Consequence: machine speed data egress that looks legitimate in every system of record, followed by a week of screenshots and apologies. Fix: split the roles. The public identity sees only a curated external corpus. Any request to the internal plane routes through a broker that evaluates venue, data class, and template constraints. Persist, allow, deny outcomes with response IDs. The safest answer in the wrong venue is a refusal you can cite. Claim 4. Events aren't state. Treating them as such fabricates incidents. Failure: out of order complete arrives before create, or a retry duplicates an irreversible action. Cause: activities are envelopes subject to duplication, delay, reordering, and loss. Without idempotency keys and an authoritative state spine, every transient multiplies entropy. Consequence: it only happened once in logs and it happened twice in the data plane. Fix: idempotency everywhere. Authoritative state outside the event stream. Deterministic workflows that bind tool execution to a policy decision tied to an operation ID. If an event can't be safely replayed, it shouldn't control state. Claim 5. Experience plane spend buys applause, not control. Failure: budgets drain into turn relays, avatar seconds, and regional speech sprawl while policy remains aspirational. Cause: incentives favor demos over gates. Consequence: higher cost, more failure domains, unchanged authorization entropy. Fix: make UI optional, fund the control plane. Swap avatar seconds for per tool call decisions, negative space in retrieval, and segmented identities. Your first denied decision will outperform any standing ovation. Claim 6. Conditional access is necessary, not sufficient. Failure: token time excellence paired with tool time ambiguity. Cause: authentication and authorization conflated. No per action adjudication. Consequence: who may try, solved. What may happen, left to prompts and hope. Fix: pair CA with least privilege and a policy gate in front of high-risk tools. Require structured requests, evaluate deterministically, persist outcomes. Now, allowed and denied are artifacts, not interpretations. Claim 7. RAG must be a boundary, not a feature. Failure: nearest neighbor outruns entitlements and speech becomes egress. Cause: similarity first, eligibility later, and generation unconstrained by evidence. Consequence: confident answers that leak by design. Fix: pre-filter retrieval by user ID, access, scope, confidentiality, and venue. Enforce sight or silent generation. Treat refusal as success. Log excluded chunks and denial reasons. The safest knowledge system prefers silence when proof is thin. The pattern is the point. Each failure begins with intent ambiguity, travels through non-deterministic orchestration, borrows too much identity, and ends in an unbounded action. Each fix relocates authority, from envelopes to state, from prompts to policy, from personas to proofs. The autopsy cadence never changes. Claim, failure, cause, consequence, fix, because the system never does. You are not misconfiguring events, you are misplacing control. 5-question governance audit, do it Monday. Here's the Monday audit that turns philosophy into action. 5 questions, no slideware, and each one returns a red, yellow, or green you can defend. 1. Does any agent have standing write or delete to production? Not in theory, in Entra, in scopes right now. If the answer is yes, replace it with just-in-time grants, tied to short-lived credentials and per-tool policy gates. Standing write is not convenience, it's unbounded blast radius. Mark red until the scope is trimmed, the identity is segmented, and the gate returns a persisted allow for each action. 2. Do you persist per-tool policy outcomes alongside actions? Transcripts and activity logs don't count. You want an artifact that reads allow rule D104 op ID AB73 constraints C17 attached to the tool effect. If you can't show the decision that approved the action, you don't have proof, only narrative. Red if policy is prompt-based, yellow if a gate exists but outcomes aren't persisted, green when every high-risk tool call has an adjudicated record tied to authoritative state. 3. Does your reg path enforce negative space? That means pre-retrieval filters on user ID, access or scope, confidentiality and venue, and site or silent generation that prefers no eligible content over speculation. If your nearest neighbor query ignores venue, you leak by default. Red if retrieval is similarity only, yellow if you filter after generation. Green when filters bind the candidate set and denials are logged with reasons for exclusion. 4. Are agent identities segmented by capability and venue? One agent should not equal one super identity. Read-only discovery, write operations, and egress live under independent principles with minimal resource-scoped permissions and short-lived tokens. If any identity can both read broadly and write externally, you've merged failure domains. Red if one principle does everything. Yellow if scopes are minimized but roles still overlap. Green when compromise in one lane doesn't cross into the others. 5. Is voice UI optional? If the face or the spoken layer is required for core safety, you've tied control to the most fragile plane. The experience path can drop, jitter, or regionalize without changing whether a delete is allowed. Make the interface an adapter, not an authority. Red if any safety control lives only in the UI. Yellow if you gate some actions in policy, but depend on the agent knowing when to refuse. Green when the control plane decides outcomes before rendering and the interface can vanish without changing decisions. Score each question red, yellow, or green, publish the results, and commit to sprint-level improvements. For reds, set a concrete remediation, remove standing write, wrap tools with a gate, push eligibility into the index, split identities, move refusal into policy. For yellows, define the artifact, decision ID persisted, denial reasons captured, token TTL reduced. For greens, add monitoring, anomaly detection on tool call shapes, denial rate trends by venue, and drift alerts when scopes creep. Then add one program metric executives understand, policy gate coverage. What percentage of high-risk tool calls flow through an adjudicating engine with persisted outcomes? Publish that number, raise it every quarter, and trade experience plane spend for control plane coverage. You don't need a crusade. You need a ledger that shows fewer eloquent postmortems and more denied decisions. Assume the face is lying, enforce your intent. The voice adds trust. The system did not earn it. Built for proof, not performance. Treat events as proposals, not state. Split identities, so agents fail small. Put a gate in front of every tool that matters and persist the decision with the action. Do one thing next, run the 5-question audit and mark anything red that depends on persona instead of policy. Then redirect budget from avatars and relays into gates and state. Subscribe if you want the deeper walkthrough on turning those reds green. Spoken cost model for avatars. Here's the cost model you can say out loud without a spreadsheet. Start with concurrency, not monthly totals. 50 concurrent sessions during peak, 6 peak hours per business day, 22 work days per month. The arithmetic is simple. 50 part 6 bus and 3, 600 and 23.7 million streaming seconds. Avatars and neural TTS bill per second. Speech to text on the inbound path bills per minute. Turn relays at egress and compute. Each second you render has at least 3 meters running. Now stack the overhead. Regional speech segregation means multiple resources, multiple quotas, and multiple keys. Failover doubles that. Monitoring for per leg WebRTC health adds another line item. Turn allocation, ICE failures, mean opinion scores, compliance retention, store transcripts and audio snippets in duplicate for discovery. Every nice to have becomes an always on spend because the illusion must be steady to maintain trust. Translate that back to risk. Those same dollars could fund per-tool policy evaluation at scale. If you diverted the avatar budget into a decision engine, you could adjudicate millions of high-risk calls monthly with proofs attached. One buys applause, one buys prevention. Finance doesn't need a rate card. They need the unit. Seconds of compute for persuasion versus decisions per action for control. When budgets tighten, the cut line gets obvious. Use this line to close the loop. Avatar seconds are a variable cost tied to peak behavior you don't fully control. Policy decisions are a fixed, deterministic control tied to the actions that actually cause incidents, spent where causality lives. Protocol standardizes the envelope, not the guarantees. Events are envelopes. The activity schema, turn context, direct line, these define shape, not destiny. In production, you assume 4 failure modes: duplication, delay, reordering, and loss. If your logic treats an envelope as authority, you've already conceded unpredictability. The fix is boring and strong. Idempotency keys on every operation. An authoritative state store that snapshots eligibility and progression. Deterministic workflows that bind tool execution to a policy decision referencing the operation ID. Replay becomes harmless because state, not arrival time, controls effect. Add sequencing rules at the gate. Complete without create committed returns a deny. Delete after delete committed returns the prior outcome. Events propose. State decides. Tools accept decisions, not narrative imperatives. And document the negative space. Persist, ignore duplicate, dropped stale, and reordered but safe alongside allow deny. You'll stop arguing with ghosts in post-incident review because the guarantees live where they belong, in state and policy, not in an envelope that made it through a VPN hairpin at 197 milliseconds. Verbal diagram of the control plane path. Picture the path as 5 gates in sequence, each doing a different job and none of them substituting for the others. Gate 1 is authentication with conditional access. This is token time. The question here is simple: who or what is this? Signals come in: workload identity, device posture if applicable, risk level, network boundaries, and conditional access either issues a token or it doesn't. If it does, you've proven presence under current risk. You have not proven anything about the next action. That distinction matters. Gate 2 is retrieval pre-filtering. Treat retrieval as authorization, not a convenience. Before any vector lookup, you filter by user ID or agent principal, access scope, confidentiality, and venue. These are hard predicates, not suggestions. The candidate set is bound to entitlements and context. If nothing passes, that emptiness is a safe outcome. Sight or silence starts here. Gate 3 is the policy gate for tools. The agent never sends a verb, it sends a structured request: actor, intent, scope, data class, venue, and an operation ID. The policy engine evaluates that tuple against rules and authoritative state, then returns allow, deny, or transform with constraints and a decision ID. Tools accept decisions, not freeform imperatives. This is where determinism enters the system. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes. Gate 4 is execution with idempotency and authoritative state. The tool binds the operation to state, enforces idempotency by operation ID, and applies the decision exactly once. Replays return the same outcome. Out-of-order arrivals don't materialize because state, not timing, governs effect. If complete shows up before create committed, the gate denies. If delete repeats, the prior outcome is returned. Events are envelopes, state is authority. Gate 5 is forensics with Purview plus policy artifacts and provenance. Audit captures what happened. Provenance captures why it happened, the retrieval transaction, candidate ranking, exclusions, decision graph. And the policy outcome is persisted alongside the action. Rule ID, constraints, inputs, links to authoritative state. Afterward, you can tell a story, but you also have proof. Audit explains, provenance convinces, policy artifacts prevent arguments. Now stitch the gates into a single sentence you can replay in a review. Token issued under conditional access. Retrieval filtered by entitlement and venue. Action proposed to the policy engine with operation ID. Decision returned and persisted. Tool executed idempotently against authoritative state. Audit and provenance captured, including denials and exclusions. The negative space is part of the record. What was considered and rejected, what was excluded by policy, what was transformed to meet venue constraints. If you ever find yourself missing one of these gates, name the failure mode out loud. No conditional access, anyone can show up. No pre-filtered retrieval, nearest neighbor outruns policy. No per-tool policy gate, prompts become your only guardrail. No idempotent execution, retries become incidents. No artifacts and provenance, post-mortems become speculation. The verbal diagram is simple on purpose. It lets you spot the missing control just by walking the path in order. Language for executive policy. Give leaders sentences they can approve, repeat, and enforce. Start with the standard. The agent proposes, the control plane disposes. That is not a slogan, it is an architectural requirement. Every high-risk action must be adjudicated by a policy engine before execution, with the decision persisted alongside the effect. Set the mandate in measurable terms. Policy gate coverage for high-risk tools will be at least 95% this quarter and 100% next quarter. Define high risk as delete, share, post, email, payment, publish, and speech of sensitive classes. Coverage means every call flows through an adjudicating engine and produces an artifact, allow, deny, or transform, tied to an operation ID. Add the KPI that makes segmentation real. Each agent capability will operate under a distinct identity with minimal scopes. Read, write, and egress are separate failure domains. Our blast radius score goes down when compromise in one domain cannot cross into the others. Report the number of segmented agent identities per domain and the percentage with just-in-time, short-lived credentials. State the prohibition clearly. No mandatory reliance on experience plane features for safety controls. That means avatars, UI, or prompts cannot be your only protection. Safety lies in the control plane. The interface is optional. If the face disappears, decisions must remain identical. Define reporting that turns governance from theater to telemetry. Quarterly decision provenance reviews will sample allowed, denied, and transformed actions by venue and data class. Denial rate analytics will be published, and refusal templates will be standardized by policy. Executives should see denials as evidence of restraint, not friction to remove. Close the loop with a budget rule. We will trade experience plane spend for control plane coverage. If a line item funds turn, avatar seconds, or speech regions, it must tie to a control plane metric we're missing. Otherwise, we divert those dollars to per tool policy, authoritative state, and segmented identities. Spend where causality lives. Finally, write the sentence that survives escalation. Logs tell stories. Provenance shows reasoning. Gates prevent incidents. Approve it, repeat it, and hold teams to it. When an incident occurs, ask for the policy artifact. When a demo runs, ask to see the deny fire under venue rules. When a budget comes up, ask which metric improves. Policy is not a document. It is a set of decisions the system cannot bypass.